The Spin-off Podcast Network. AI wouldn't be possible without the internet, nor the internet without computers. Computers came from brilliant brains, and even they had to learn that fire was hot and water was wet. The world is constantly shifting, changing, evolving, and Daylight is an award-winning creative and technology studio that helps ambitious clients shift with it. Search daylight.nz to get in touch.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Toby Manhire. This is Gone by Lunchtime. We are recording at the unconventional time of 4 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. And I say that only because right at this very moment, the post-cabinet press conference is underway with Simeon Brown and Christopher Luxon. And they may say something important or very, very funny, and we won't know it, and that's why we haven't mentioned it. Also, the Oscars are on at the moment, another must-watch event. So we also won't be able to make any references to the Oscars. Ben won't be able to deploy any lengthy metaphors relating to the Best Picture winner. I just think it's important to lay that out at the top. We value transparency at Gone by Lunchtime. Also, by the way, it's Te Ai's birthday today.
Oh, howdy hooty tau, kia koe.
Kia ora. Wouldn't rather be anywhere else.
Oh, you almost believe him.
I believed him, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Also, Ben Thomas is here, and also Annabelle Lee Mather is here. Welcome, everybody. A bit of a list of stuff to work through today. We've got the Chinese ships doing a little bit of sightseeing off the coast of Australia and the fallout thereof. We've got Andrew Bailey, the interesting case of Andrew Bailey, and the equally interesting case of Christopher Luxon talking about Andrew Bailey. We have, what is more, citizens' arrest reforms. And finally, I do hope we'll get there to the 4-year parliamentary term and the referendum that is coming at some point or other. Should we start with the Chinese ships? So we woke up, I think it was the Friday before last, to news that there were 3 Chinese warships just knocking about out off the coast of New South Wales, I think. And then they later on travelled down towards Tasmania.
It was a delight. It was like, like in Wellington, word will suddenly spread. People will say dolphins have been seen playing in the harbour, or there's a friendly orca putting on a show, and just like that, with some unexpected visitors from the north.
I think there was also some talk that there was a submarine, perhaps lurking around there and thereabouts. One of the important parts of this was that there were live fire exercises going on out there in those crystal blue waters. And critically, the complaint from both New Zealand and Australia was that sufficient warning hadn't been given. Just a couple of hours warning had been given about these exercises underway. Judith Collins responded by saying that we shouldn't overreact, but that it was, quote, a wake-up call with regard to defence spending. There was various conjecture about what message was being sent, a lot of discussion about signals being sent. Australia, I think it's fair to say, is the likelier recipient, with New Zealand coming in swiftly behind. There's a lot of stuff going on geopolitically. Generally, one of the things, Annabelle, that happened not that long ago, last year in fact, was that New Zealand and Australian ships did their own sojourn through the Taiwan Strait, which didn't go down terribly well in Beijing. Shortly after, then Winston Peters happened to be heading in a pre-planned meeting to Beijing and was hopefully able to iron things out with his old mate, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. What did you make, Annabelle, of all of this, the response, how much it says about the kind of geostrategic world we live in now?
First of all, it raised a couple of questions for me, like where was Five Eyes on this? Where was the intel about, what was happening? Why was the notice so short? Surely our intelligence relationships should have been able to give us a heads up earlier that this was taking place. I think it's probably a response to those exercises that happened last year in the South China Sea, China wanting to flex the obvious tension building up between the US and China, all of those things. But unfortunately, it's the people of the Pacific who will ultimately, and AUKUS too, a response to AUKUS. And I think it demonstrates that taking an approach where you invest in more and more weapons doesn't de-escalate tension or conflict. It has the opposite effect.
In terms of those signals, Ben, it seems safe to say that if the Chinese were to read or hear that New Zealand and Australia were talking about how China was flexing its muscle, demonstrating the breadth, the capacity of its navy, talking about how its navy is now, by some measures, the biggest in the world, they wouldn't be too upset about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, look, I'm not a foreign policy expert, so feel free to pick this apart in the comments. But it seems difficult to divorce this from the extremely hurried retreat of the United States from what we might have called the American century or the international order. America, at least in terms of the rhetoric that's coming out and in terms of some of the incredible sort of scenes that we're seeing, with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's latest visit to the White House, that, expansionist and ambitious regional powers like China, and China is a world power, and Russia are, seeing that, now is a good time to sort of start jockeying for position. I think it is interesting to note this idea, that I think Helen Clarke also sort of raised on Q&A, where she sort of suggested yesterday, it was interesting trying to follow her kind of thinking, which was we're living in a very unstable and dangerous time geopolitically. If we were to invest, individually, we can't do much to actually sort of protect our country through our own spending. So any spending is really just to sort of show good faith and show interoperability with our allies. Well, our one last ally, which is Australia, and our, and then from there, the conclusion, we shouldn't do it. It's just a bit of a waste of money investing in defence, which I think is completely the wrong conclusion to draw. I think it's become more apparent over the last few months that, there's always been a little bit of a suspicion that America wouldn't really sort of run to our aid were anything to sort of happen in this part of the world. And now I think we may as well just take it as read with Trump in the White House. And, we need to start sort of pulling our weight, at least to the extent that the Australians expect. But
if the argument is that what happened off the coast of Australia is an argument for boosting defence spending, and the general mark now seems to be that every country in the world that wishes to be part of a partnership, however informal, needs to pony up at least 2% of the overall budget towards defence. Given what you're talking about, given the level of support expressed in a very public forum by Trump towards Zelensky, the argument could well be, why waste that money at all? There is no clearer evidence that there is no loyalty or support to be expected.
Yeah, well, look, I think we're on our own as far as the States is concerned. I think every Western democracy should just be kind of pricing that in at the moment. It seems that there might be scope for some level of deal making if you're prepared to take part in a United States shakedown. But beyond that, I think increasingly we kind of have to, look to one, taking care of ourselves, which is not particularly realistic, and two, at least playing some kind of commensurate part with the only regional power on which we are on very good terms, and who would be expected to sort of see us within their kind of sphere of national defence, which is Australia.
Well, in a military sense, we're not able to defend ourselves. There's no way we can stand up against the might of China or anyone else. I guess in terms of defence investment, should we be investing in our Navy to be able to better patrol our exclusive economic zone and protect our fisheries and all of those sorts of things? Yes. Should we be paying our defence forces properly and enabling them to, take part on peacekeeping missions that uphold international law? Yes. But should we be, getting involved in stuff like AUKUS and that sort of thing? I'm not convinced that that's really in the best interest. And I think our independent foreign policy has served us really well, and it's probably more critical than it's ever been before.
Well, I suspect AUKUS is probably off the table anyway, right? I mean, it doesn't seem like
who knows? But whether or not Trump is even, thinking about AUKUS and that relationship is hard to say. What about Winston Peters going to Beijing? There has been in recent times among the various nations that have inclined slightly more towards Washington D.C. So even before what happened with Trump, there was a general tendency in that direction. And then more recently, we've seen, for example, the Cook Islands enter into this unexpected strategic partnership with Beijing. And then there's a whole load of other bullet points on Winston Peters' list to deal with when he went over for that meeting. I was talking to someone today, Ben, who was present at some of Winston Peters' trip, which also took in Korea and Mongolia, and saying that it is just impressive to watch him in that statesman-like foreign minister role, that he just radiates this sort of charisma and the history he has with a lot of people involved, that it's very hard, we've said this before, but hard to reconcile that with the guy in the House who's just hollering out cheap barbs across the chamber.
I think this is the role where he really shines, where he is most definitely his best self.
Yeah, for sure. And look, Winston Peters is a very accomplished statesman on the world stage. He's, he is very charismatic. He's very professional. He's very across his brief. Unfortunately, we're not, that helps to avoid sort of disasters like we saw in the Oval Office the other day, or was it the side room or whatever that they use with Zelensky, where, two very unstatesmanlike, representatives of the United States and Zelensky just weren't sort of, kind of meeting, in terms of where I think they would have thought they would have been prior to their public appearance. But ultimately, what we're dealing with here is sort of great power, ambitions, and priorities versus a very not great power in New Zealand. We had a lot more leverage, if you wanted to call it that, with China 15 years ago, when we were being used as a sort of pilot for its 5 firsts, when we entered the free trade agreement with them. But now, you really do see the evolution. I can't remember the name of the person, but it was, a China expert who was quoted in the media recently. And, he was, as somebody who sort of, I think, was probably, closer to the sort of Chinese sphere, as a lot of these sort of, China experts or China boosters are, was sort of saying, well, China will have been disappointed by the disloyalty of New Zealand, and you see, that the framing of the sort of relationship has gone ever closer to sort of, the sort of idea that we're a kind of vassal or client state, and that's just the the reality now that the States is getting away from its sort of 2000s world police sort of role. Which allowed, people like Helen Clarke back in the 2000s to say that in New Zealand we lived in a very, very, very benign strategic environment, because we no longer do.
Let's pivot clumsily from the global stage to a rather smaller and more quotidian setting, which is...
Speaking of great men of history, great statesmen.
Well, Andrew Bailey we're going to talk about. And I'm still not sure we know exactly what transpired, except that there was a hand and there was an arm and there was a staffer and there was a complaint. And then after several days, there was an announcement of a resignation. A live animated? I think it was animated. Yeah. It was definitely and it does, I think last time we discussed the travails of Mr. Andrew Bailey, who has now resigned as Commerce Minister. You, Ben, mentioned the thick of it, which is obviously a bit of a go-to for many of these sorts of episodes. But this is still the thick of it, isn't it? And the sort of not just in terms of what happened, which is obviously an awful thing to happen to the staff who are involved. So let's put that down. But in terms of the sort of nebulous uncertainty, the ambiguity about precisely what happened, the repeated media queries about what the hand did, all that sort of stuff. And then, and we'll get to this in a second, the way that the Prime Minister responded. First of all, can anyone account for what happened? What happened?
Me and Mihi tried to do some reenactments on each other.
Yep.
That obviously had to change as the press conference evolved, and it went from touching the arm to grabbing the arm. We don't know. Right.
Did you clear with Mihi, did you sign beforehand to make sure that would all be...
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Ben, what happened?
Let me see. What was it? There was touching the arm. What was it? Bailey's initial statement was that he was impatient to deliver in his portfolios. And after a bit of search through the public service and the Beehive, he found that the blockage to policy being affected was somewhere in the kind of tight triceps or upper arm area, and it kind of needed to be worked or massaged out, or maybe given a bit of a bang to sort of loosen it up.
A bang.
But a lactic acid build-up.
Yeah, just kind of squeeze that policy through, I guess. I'm not sure.
Whack.
So, we don't know, but we can kind of assume that this wasn't a sort of friendly pat on the arm, that, there were obviously circumstances whereby the staff member or somebody felt pretty, disquieted about what had happened.
I went to a boys' school and we used to give each other dead arms a lot. Maybe it was a dead arm.
Maybe it was a dead arm. You know what I really wish? Do you remember, Karen wants her $20 back and the animation that went with that? I really want someone to do one of those using the audio from the press conference.
Yes.
The bizarre thing about the communication of it was that Bailey had this sort of, this very facile sort of line about, I was impatient to deliver in my portfolios. And Luxon sort of said, well, the minister, or Bailey, has described what happened. I'm not going to get into it. And then sort of this excruciating Mike Hosking interview, which... would have just been a normal sort of frustrating, oblique sort of interview if it wasn't for Hosking and his ability to kind of carry these things through with sort of almost perfect comedic timing to the extent that it sort of resembled a sort of Clarke and Dawe's sketch. Yeah. But Luxon would not say, I sacked him. He would have been sacked. It was a sackable offence. Instead it was...
Well, hypothetical, he did resign. No, I know that, but just answer the question. Well, would you have sacked? Well, he didn't meet the expectations of a minister.
Well, he realised that he hadn't lived up to my ministerial expectations, which is puzzling on a couple of grounds. The first is that why would you leave Andrew Bailey to be the arbiter of his own behaviour when, if the track record shows anything, it's that Andrew Bailey does not know how he's coming across from day to day or minute to minute with other people. Second of all, the way Luxon was talking, it was almost like it reminded me of a manager or a chief executive where there's been like an NDA signed, with somebody leaving with a golden handshake or something.
Yes, you can imagine.
Saying, no, he just wanted
there's an employment lawyer over in the corner of the room listening, and you want to make sure that you careful, something like that. Yeah, I've wondered that.
And that's not how ministerial departures happen, right?
No.
And so it was, was it just that Luxon has had drilled into him in his past as a chief executive, how to avoid charges of constructive dismissal in the employment court? Or is it that, it just seemed bizarre that Bailey was sort of able to set the term, or at least attempt to set the terms like that, in terms of, I was just an impatient and busy minister trying to do my best, and somehow an arm was touched, and then I magnanimously decided that I would quit. Just
to wind it back a bit for people who didn't hear the interview on Hosking, and Hosking is a brilliant interviewer, and he wasn't satisfied with what Luxon thought would be a straightforward, perhaps reasonably diplomatic, gentlemanly response, which is to say, well, I didn't need to sack him because he understood the expectations that had been set, which I set for all my ministers. And so when he came to see me, Tom, and Hosking goes, yeah, but come on, would you have sacked him? And then Luxon goes again.
Yes or no? I can say he didn't meet the expectations I have of ministers. So you would have sacked him?
I didn't need to because he resigned.
I see what you're doing here. I don't.
No, but you're talking about a specific case, right?
Would you have said? Look,
have I done a good job of laying down expectations of my ministers?
Yeah,
yes, crystal clear.
And then Hosking goes, "Oh, come on, mate. This is why people don't like you in the polls." They do call each other mate in these interviews, to be clear. And Luxon goes again around the houses. And at that point, as Ben says, you're pulling out your fingernails. And it wasn't obvious whether Luxon really grasped it, except that Hosking was at once demanding the question and coaching him on how, listen, mate, you've got to answer this.
It was just crazy. Like, this was a great opportunity for Luxon to look like a tough guy when it came to his team. And after being criticised for, not being tough enough on his team, actually Andrew Bailey from last time, this was a great opportunity, like super low stakes for him to go in and say, yep, he resigned and it's a good thing he did because, because I just don't tolerate that, and he would have been gone. That's just not good enough. And people would have been like, cool, okay, that's the side of Luxon that we've been wanting to hear. But instead, he refers to it as a personnel issue. When have you ever heard MPs being described as personnel? And he treats it like it's like some research project for an MBA where he's trying to impress us that he's such a great manager that he doesn't need to sack people because they sack themselves, like a David Brent office skit or something. It was bizarre.
The bit where he goes, you've seen, that when personnel issues come up, I deal with them decisively. I've been doing it all my life. It's like, like you sacked your mum when you were 8 for poor performance.
Yeah.
Like, how far does the record go on this?
But the worst thing about this is that it appears that someone has been assaulted by their boss at work, and there is very little discussion or empathy that's been displayed for that individual. It's all about, Andrew needed time to discuss this with his family and work through it with his family.
Andrew's done some amazing things in that portfolio, which seemed odd
Yeah,
moment.
just the absolute lack of aroha or respect for the person that's had something really awful and humiliating happen to them in their workplace. It's unbelievable.
Totally. And Hosking said that. I mean, Hosking made that point. And weirdly, I think Luxon gets caught up in, it's a bit of the David Shearers sometimes, hearing different responses to what he's meant to say or not meant to say. I don't know. There was one of the points that Janet Wilson, the columnist, PR person and former comms advisor to National Party leaders, one of the things she said was that where he struggles is in the word she used was a framed up argument. And I think there's something in that. You, Annabelle, shared, not in relation to this, but it was a John Key clip, social media clip of John Key back in the day talking to Leighton Smith about the marriage equality bill. But John Key, in a situation, used to be able to frame up an argument. So he wasn't just saying words, he was taking you from A through B to C, and therefore that's why I've arrived at this conclusion. And he sort of had a very plain-speaking way of doing it, a very ordinary middle New Zealand joker way of doing it. It's really hard, to be clear. It's really hard. But he didn't seem afflicted by different voices that were advising him one way or the other.
It was compelling for me watching that clip. It popped up on my TikTok. I think the account's called New Zealand Politics, and they play lots of old clips of politicians going right back to the 70s and stuff. And it was, as Toby said, Key being interviewed by Leighton Smith on marriage equality. I had forgotten, or perhaps at the time I hadn't appreciated, what a gifted communicator he was. And I think, to be fair to Luxon, I don't know if you could teach what Key had. Key had a very special way of being able to communicate with New Zealanders. But what we saw in that Hosking's interview was so below par, that you may not be able to be Key good, but you have to be much, much better than where you are. And I think too, it's going to start to make some of his MPs start to question his leadership. I think if you can't manage a very easy score like that, where someone has basically eliminated themselves from the game and come out looking good, then how are you going to fare in the next election? I don't know.
And Ben, Mike Hosking, who is open about his, that's the kind of broadcasting that you get on News Talk ZP, and he said, I support Luxon in the direction he's taking us. But he's also clearly getting a bit exasperated. And that isn't just some media sideshow. That is a meaningful thing, wouldn't you agree? That if Mike Hosking starts to feel as though Luxon is not giving him direct answers and goes harder on him over time and starts to kind of throw his arms in the air, that does have a radiating effect into the National Caucus room.
Yeah, well, that's Jacinda Ardern, I think late in the piece, descheduled her regular Hosking episodes on her weekly media round.
Which we've had an echo of in recent times from Tory Whanau, the Wellington Mayor, by the way.
Yes, yeah, and I don't ever think that's advisable. I think it makes sense to turn up on a channel where that has a large audience of people who don't normally vote for you, because you might actually just grab a few of those votes back. It makes but that's not an option that's open to a National Party Prime Minister on ZB. That's 500 odd thousand people per morning listen to Hosking. He's incredibly influential, and these things do sort of, seep out and seep back into the kind of general level of confidence. Look, a bad interview is not a trigger for any kind of, leadership spill or anything. But, the question of Luxon's leadership, not in terms of sort of immediately replacing him, but, how he's performing as a topic of conversation, has been ongoing. And this is not going to help.
Well, you can call it you've made a complete meal of this.
TaxAct knows small business owners can sometimes use a little help with their taxes. That's why TaxAct has Expert Assist, a team of live tax experts ready to answer any questions you may have. Think of them as your own personal sidekick. Not like one of those funny talking animal sidekicks. More like the super smart nerding out on tax code and business casual attire sidekick. But just as helpful and lovable. Tax Act. Let's get them over with.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength, Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
Paul Goldsmith announced last week some proposed reforms to citizen arrest rules, I think mostly contained in the Crimes Act, which do appear to be a bit of a soup at the moment and require some clarification. However, the changes, which included making citizens arrest something you could do during the day as well as during the night, didn't know that there was a cutoff point, a sort of reverse curfew for citizens arrests.
It's been a while since I've done one.
Is it? Well, I was going to. You say that, but one of my questions is
daylight savings makes it harder.
That's true.
You want to wait till winter to really just.
I just can't stay up late enough to do it. That's part of
Yeah,
the
you can do a
reason.
couple on your way home once it hits sort of like August.
What I want to know is whether or not your interaction with Mihi Forbes, or indeed Andrew Bailey's with a staffer, meets the bar for a citizen's arrest.
Bro, you guys should see me in Countdown. Yeah. If I'm in a bad mood.
What, you're the one doing the citizen's arrest or being citizen arrested?
Citizens arrest you so hard.
Right, like Todd Scott from NBR.
All of that.
Yeah, because that's another question.
All of the greats.
The question is whether it moves out of the into the Crimes Act from the Summary Offences Act, right? So it's got to be in the Crimes Act. Does Todd Scott rugby tackling some punter at the Countdown in Auckland City constitute a potential Crimes Act offence? And if so, could you citizens arrest the guy doing the citizens arresting, and then just have this domino effect of citizens arrest just sweeping the nation one after one as Annabelle and Todd Scott and Ben Thomas just
grab
rugby
each other's
tackle
arms
each other
as we grab
animatedly. The announcements, which came in part as a result of the Dairy Owners Association, or the small retailers, who are really concerned, and quite understandably, about the crime that they encounter, the slow response from police, and just feeling quite powerless and wanting to have the ability to do something about it, Ben. But the response from a range of groups, an unlikely coalition that spanned the Retail New Zealand, trade unions, the Police Association, does send a bit of a message that maybe this isn't exactly what people want. And even more so, one of the enthusiastic champions of the proposed reforms was Brian Tamaki, who went, this is true, who went, hooray, let me at it. I mean, it wasn't...
This is going to help us, arrest suspected homosexuals in the street, basically.
Well, but that's the subtext of what he was saying. Yeah.
No, I mean, you can see where they were going with this, right? Which is that you don't, shopkeepers, sole charge small business people, do feel particularly exposed. There is this, the last thing you want is, if there is actually a chance that there's, some low-hanging fruit, you might say, in terms of the criminal community, that they could, detain instead of, block the access of, instead of letting them just walk away with goods, right? That you don't want them to sort of then be prosecuted for that, or even sued for what's called false imprisonment or unlawful detention, whatever. The issue is, though, of course, I think that when you announce something like this, as per Brian Tamaki, there's this sort of sense that, this makes it a much bigger thing. This is going to be much more common. Security guards at stores will be instructed to crash tackle people. Now, I think that's highly unlikely because of the sort of the various health and safety requirements on company boards and at a governance level. I would suspect that most of these firms would rush in policies about this if they don't have them already, to ensure that staff don't get involved in things like that and don't get involved in physical confrontations. But where it is just sort of stepping in the way of somebody who's getting off with a trolley load of groceries, they might say, would you mind stopping? I don't know. But, I think, in reality, apart from those most perverse outcomes, where you might get sort of Brian Tamaki mobs wandering around until they're sort of brought to heel, I can't see too much of a change, coming from this.
I understand why there's so many alarm bells going off around the country, and I disagree with Ben. I think that there's real cause for concern because of these proposals. I think, firstly, what we're most likely to see is Māori and Pasifika youth being targeted as a result of this unfairly. I think we get ourselves into Trayvon Martin territory, and we'll probably see a lot of that. I think it puts an unfair expectation on people like security guards to act as police, when actually this is really just a band-aid for a lack of investment in our police and having people on the beat, patrolling streets like they used to. I think it doesn't it doesn't address the core issues. Why do retailers feel more at risk? Why are dairies more at risk? Well, more than likely, next door to many dairies now are liquor outlets, which seem to proliferate at the end of every street now, as well as vape shops and how expensive smoking and vaping is, which, causes more aggravation and means that, these types of shops are targeted so that people can get, appease their addictions. So I think there's real cause for concern. If you look what happened recently with Golriz Garaman, and her image being leaked on social media, taken in a supermarket, and that was, it turns out, a security guard who leaked it. This is very dangerous territory that we're getting into when we're empowering Joe Bloggs to go in and arrest people without any due course or reason or skill or justification or anything. So I think, I can understand why people are deeply concerned.
Yeah, look, I think that is a good point, especially for young Māori kids. Yeah, I think that is actually something they probably need to look at pretty closely before they advance it. The other thing I would note is that during the election campaign, in the debates, both Christopher Luxon and Chris Hipkins said that if they saw a youth committing a crime, they would tackle them in the street and try and prevent them. And we don't want the Prime Minister breaking any laws. So this might actually just be setting up for the campaign launch for 2026, well, I guess, which is going to be
Andrew Bailey's got more time on his hand now to animatedly detain people, doesn't he? Another announcement Paul Goldsmith has made in the recent times, he's a very busy minister, relates to the length of the parliamentary term. Now, I think both ACT and New Zealand First had 4-year parliamentary term to be put to a referendum in their coalition deals. I think I have that right. But it's the ACT one that is being served up and will go through the parliamentary process. It's slightly got a bit of a interesting element added to it insofar as...
Thank God Jenna Lynch was able to explain it to us like we were babies on RNZ last week.
Did she?
It was very helpful.
The technical term for it is fucking nerd shit. It's like, it's
But
it's for people
I'm
who
just
really
like,
love
have 4
tabletop.
years. I don't want to know all of this detail. Have the 4 years. I don't care about your select committees or
So
whatever.
this is- yeah.
Take it. It's all good. Don't make me understand
so
it.
just to try and explain it, the idea is that it's 3 years as usual, unless you take the 4-year option. But you can only take the 4-year option if you agree to distribute MPs across select committees as if you remove the executive, i.e. the ministers, you take it out, and then you divvy up people across select committees proportionately in that manner. Is that right?
For those of you who are still awake, did you compute all of that?
So you get 4 years. Some other stuff which isn't in the bill yet, but could go through in select committee is you get an extra 6 months if you sign agreeing not to drive Land Rovers up parliamentary stairs, and an extra 2.5 months if you do the lawns at Parliament. And the clerk of the House just gets to add months and take them off in the parliamentary term, according to his or her.
Look, why can't we make it easy? Just make it 4 years.
Just
have 4 years, for God's sake. This 3-year thing is absolutely ridiculous. Nothing gets done. You're constantly caught between two political ideologies, like 6 months of people sucking up to you and then 2 years of them treating you like crap and then another 6 months of sucking up to you. Make it stop. Let's just do 4 years. Do whatever you want with the select committees. I don't care.
Okay. Well, we could do both, couldn't we? We could do introduce that select committee change and at the same time, which is like the thinking behind it is sound. The thinking behind it is that, we're the fastest lawmaker in the West, tum-tum-tum, lack of checks and balances and accountability, and so that adds one extra layer in a nation that doesn't have an upper chamber and so on. I mean, but it does seem more sensible to go, we will do that and we will do the referendum, but the referendum is on the 4-year or not. Ben?
Yeah, exactly. Look, putting in the whole choice, the money or the bag bit. It's for people who enjoy the character build part of video games more than the playing of them. It's you should just make it more complicated. I came up with an idea which was, elections are a combination of a ballot and a tender. Before the vote, each party says how many votes it will sacrifice for an extra year in power.
Yeah.
2% for each year beyond the first.
Yes.
It's just, it's ridiculous. We don't need a 4-year term either. It's, that's something that I think, that's something that I believed in when I worked in the Beehive, and I think most people, when they're in government or even when they're in Parliament, are like, I just need some time to myself to think without the public, and you don't. Parties in New Zealand or governments in New Zealand very rarely lose after the first term. Last time it happened was 75, and so you should actually bake in that you have 6 years. But you do have to make sure that you don't completely alienate the country irrevocably in those first 3 years, which doesn't seem crazy, right? The only way you will be turfed after 3 years, usually, is by being so repugnant to the public that they will overturn the kind of traditional New Zealand voting pattern, in which case it's hard to see why there should be a protection in there. If you want more certainty or the ability to do more things, get rid of MMP. Go back to first past the post.
Yeah.
Noodling around with term times won't really do it. There's many sort of both satirical and serious works which show that it doesn't really, in politics things take about 6 months longer than you have, no matter what the term is.
I think the main issue with his proposal is that it fails to do anything about the debate that's happening as a result of the biggest political event that's happened in New Zealand, which is the Te Matatini competition and the judging process.
Oh, really? Was there something you weren't happy with that?
A lot of people unhappy.
Unhappy.
Very, very unhappy with it. And can I say, in terms of political debate at Matatini, no one got through unscathed. Everyone was getting songs written about them.
Oh.
Amazing and haka. But just while we're on this subject, can I mihi to Ngāti Whakauē, who won and just did a magnificent
So they
performance.
deserve to win?
They deserved to win.
Okay.
They were outstanding.
All right.
And of course, their bracket was a mihi to Ta Bom Gillies, the last surviving member of the 28th Māori Battalion. It was so moving, so beautiful. And, one of the things that we can all feel proud of as New Zealanders, I think, at that whakataitai.
Perfect note to end on. Thanks for your company. Cheers, Annabelle, Ben, and happy birthday to I here.
Hey!
The Spin-off Podcast Network.